Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Berwick. I'm Policy Counsel with the Future of Privacy Forum, where I devote my time to analysing and helping our members understand the privacy law and policy issues raised by immersive technologies and open banking. This is the fourth panel of our ongoing Immersive Tech Panel Series, and today's panel will be focused on the privacy and data protection implications of using immersive technologies like extended reality to facilitate teaching, learning, and student engagement. Before handing it over to my colleague Jamie to kick things off, I want to place this panel in the context of the overall series. Immersive technologies like virtual reality, spatial computing, and neurotechnologies are changing the way we work, play, learn, take care of our health, and much more. At the same time, privacy legislation is gaining momentum around the US, and regulators have indicated that they will use their consumer protection authority to address privacy issues in digital technology industries. It's not always clear, though, how privacy laws would impact immersive technologies differently than other types of technology. But on a deeper level, there are also questions about the new privacy risks that arise when immersive technologies are integrated into domains like health, advertising, and education. As these technologies become a part of our everyday lives, it is critical to understand their capabilities, their unique risks, how regulatory proposals might address them, and best practices organizations can adopt to protect people's privacy. Through a series of panels, we seek to address these emerging questions by asking what is unique or new about immersive technologies. So far, we've explored how immersive technologies can greatly improve how we deliver healthcare, conduct advertising, and provide safety and navigation features in vehicles. But we've also looked at how these applications without proper safeguards could threaten privacy by, for example, enabling inferences of sensitive personal information. Now, on November 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, our next panel will focus on how AI and immersive technologies are being integrated and the unique privacy risks this poses. But today, we're focusing on education. So I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Jamie Garoche, Senior Counsel for FPF's Youth and Education Workstream, who will be moderating today's discussion. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to the events team at FPF for helping to put this together. I'm going to go right into introducing our fantastic panelists for today. So we have Dr. Mark Millerone, who currently serves as President and CEO of National University, which is one of the largest private nonprofit universities in the United States. National University is designated as a minority-serving institution, a Hispanic-serving institution, and has a 50-plus year history of innovating around the needs of military, working, and other non-traditional students. We have Dr. Nirg Shetry, a professor at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and research fellow at Kobe University in Japan. He's authored 13 books and about 250 academic articles, and is a two-time TEDx speaker about the roles of emerging technologies in our society. He's provided consulting services to Asian Development Bank, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and various UN agencies. And we have Kaylee Brown. Kaylee works at Pearson as a part of Pearson Labs, a research and development experimentation team that explores emerging technologies and works to discover how they can help Pearson solve some of their learners' and customers' biggest problems. She has a particular focus on the metaverse and virtual reality and is passionate about finding new ways in which to implement these technologies in learning. So I'm going to take a few minutes to just sort of frame out our discussion before I turn it over to questions to our panelists. And I just want to level set because immersive technology can have a lot of different applications in higher education. And in recent years, use of the technology in the classroom has proliferated. Now, it's still relatively uncommon, but more and more higher education campuses are adopting this tribrid model flowing in between in-person, online, and simulated teaching environments. And there are a lot of reasons for this. It can help learners grasp abstract concepts and gain hands-on experience in low-risk virtual settings. It can provide a practical and career-building experience without students ever having to leave a classroom. And it can offer greater student excitement and also engagement of different types of learners by offering an alternative to traditional learning environments. And universities are adopting immersive tech programs across many different areas of study, including science and engineering, medical education, language learning, historical and cultural education, professional training and technical education, and even for enhancing social and emotional learning in healthcare or social work type settings. And so a few terms that might come up. Augmented reality refers to a technology that overlays digital content onto the real world. AR can be experienced through smartphones or other devices with digital images or data overlaying the physical world. And then virtual reality is a computer-generated environment that simulates a real-world environment, creating a sense of presence and immersion. It can be experienced through a headset or other device that provides a fully immersive experience, allowing users to interact with objects and people in the virtual world. Now, before I turn to our panelists, I also do want to set out our framework for student privacy in this discussion. I know that there's some people on this call who probably know a whole lot about FERPA and others who are not quite as familiar. So just a quick overview. When we're thinking about student data and student privacy, this is sensitive data. And so there are three different types of risks that we're thinking about. The first is data use in compliance with federal, state, or local laws and policies? So this is where FERPA comes in. We know that there are a lot of state laws that apply to ed tech, but those are specifically in K through 12. So for higher education, the real privacy law here is FERPA, which applies to universities that receive funding from the Department of Education. And essentially it protects the privacy of student education records that contain any information directly related to a student. FERPA requires consent from a parent or eligible student, meaning a student over 18, unless one of the 10 exceptions apply. So what I want to highlight is there's very limited access within educational institutions to specific student records. It should be limited to school officials with a legitimate educational interest. And there are several exceptions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what I really want to highlight is that FERPA was passed in 1974. So congressional members were probably sitting around thinking about locked file cabinets with paper records and locked administrative offices. Things were really different then. So right now we've retrofitted FERPA to fit our current environment. But what I want to highlight and make sure is sort of understood is this is new, especially with immersive technology as emerging technology. It's really new. So we're still figuring out what this looks like. But I did talk about, and also there are a few other federal laws that apply here, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. But I did mention that there are two other types of harm that we're talking about. So, or risk, excuse me. So then there's the risk of actual harm. So is this technology safe, secure, and private? Because, unauthorized disclosure of student data can have individual, organizational, or societal harms. And finally, there's the risk of perception and trust. So regardless of anything else, how is this being perceived by the school community? So here's when we come into some of those more ethical considerations. And so with that, I don't want to take up any more of our time. I'd like to turn to our panelists, starting with Kaylee. As someone who works on the development side, I'd love for you to kick off our discussion. What does immersive tech have to offer to higher education, and how can it improve a student's educational experience?
Yes, I think it's really interesting when you start thinking about the educational outcomes that could come from immersive technologies, whether that's AR or XR, VR, all of these, words that you may have heard, extended reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. It's really interesting. There's a lot of research that's kind of being done. It's still a relatively new space, as you touched on earlier, Jamie. But I think for students, if you think about there's a few different areas where students can really gain something very tangible out of these experiences. And that's part of it is engagement into the content and really being immersed and interacting with content in a whole new way. And then there's also just learning about things in a 3D environment really opens up new pathways in students' brains to be able to grasp concepts in a new way. So if you think about things like math education, Some concepts that you might learn in math are really meant to be learned in 3D. They're very 3D concepts that you can't really interact with in a 2D environment. So having this extra layer that you can add on to educational experiences to include that 3D environment can really be helpful for things like math and science. If you think about history implications, being able to drop a student into Rome in the ancient Roman times to be able to walk through the Colosseum or sit in the Colosseum and watch what actually happens there, how much more engaging is that for students? How much more will they remember that? And then speaking of memory, just remembering educational experiences that you had, if you think about your own life and the meetings you've been in, if you have been in person in a meeting, sort of activating that 3D sense really helps you remember those conversations more if you're in person versus, a virtual Zoom or something like that. The same thing can be said of 3D immersive experiences. Maybe not as good as in person, but it's sort of the next best level. A little bit better than being on a Zoom call or reading content on a screen. You actually being there and experiencing it in that 3D environment just unlocks a new level in these students' brains. So I think that's kind of what I would say is it unlocks education. And then you can also talk about things like accessibility of being, and there's accessibility concerns, right, around XR being able to access the technology and having fast enough internet, but kind of more broadly, being able to let students experience things that they might not have the money to travel to these different areas, but using immersive technologies, suddenly they can, and the whole world of education kind of opens up for a lot of students in that way.
Thanks, Kaylee. I definitely want to come back to some of those accessibility questions, but for now, I want to direct our next question to Mark. National University began offering immersive tech experiences by piloting a program within its School of Health Professions in 2020, and then decided to expand its offerings in the 2023 school year. So what did you learn during this pilot program? Can you tell us also a little bit more about where the program is today, how students are feeling, what kind of feedback you've gotten?
So we've been early adopters of any kind of technology that can help our students learn more effectively, complete more effectively, and have deeper, richer experiences. We have a 52-year history of doing that for non-traditional working and military students. In fact, we were the early innovators with this unbelievable asynchronous learning technology back in 1973 called the cassette tape. All right, so we've seen like the journeys where like every new technology holds promise and peril. Right, where there are all kinds of things it can do to open doors, but also you just have to understand what the weaknesses are, what the dangers might be within it. Given we're a university that heavily focuses with military students, about half of our undergraduate students are either active duty, veteran, or family members of military. Very comfortable with simulation technology. So VR technologies was not something that was out of the ordinary. That program in particular you're talking about from 2020 really came around because of the pandemic. We have a very strong nursing program, and our nursing folks were being asked by the state of California to turn out more nurses than ever before because of what was happening with the pandemic. And one of the things we knew is a lot of our rising nurses, it was life-threatening to put them into COVID exposure situations in their clinicals. So one of the things our nurse educators decided to do was to build the VR environment in particular to give them lots of reps and to give them a fail-safe environment where they could go in and they could really try, test, and tune their ability to be able to respond in that clinical situation in particular. It was so successful. Our students absolutely loved it. And they called it the in-between space between the textbooks and the live clinicals. And they loved it because they could test and try and fail, and they weren't hurting themselves and they weren't hurting a patient. Right. And so they could really got a lot of reps with it. It was wildly successful. And it's to the point now where we've been leveraging this kind of VR technology in other disciplines for the same kind of learning experiences. We're now rolling it out in for virtual reality study halls, where students absolutely want to be in a space with other students and see other students and connect with other students, but they don't have the time to be able to drive other places. We have a lot of non-traditional students, so they're not living on campus, and we're also using it for virtual reality-driven, job interview simulations. So we're using VR and AI, and they're doing job interview kind of simulations. And what we've learned in this is this really is a tool that can expand learning possibilities and allows them to learn more deeply and more effectively. And it's not, it's not the only way they're going to learn. It's going to be an added tool in the toolbox, right? The biggest thing for us is remembering that you got to put it on purpose. You do it because it works, because it's part of a thoughtful, purposeful learning enterprise. You don't do it because it's cool. You get no cool points for this stuff. If it actually doesn't help the students learn more effectively, there are other ways you can do it. But when you put it on purpose and actually make sure you're being careful with it, really solid outcomes coming out of it. The other big thing I'll tell you is what we are always committed to is making sure we're preparing students for the world as it is. They're walking into a world that's going to be using more and more of these tools and technologies. So in their world of work, they're going to be experiencing these. In their family lives, they're going to be experiencing this. In their democracy, they're experiencing this in terms of different kinds of tools to be able to pop this up. So we want them to actually be in an environment where they can touch it, they can be a part of it and connect with it, and then understand what that might mean for them professionally when they get into space. The last example I'll give you on that is what we've heard from a lot of our rising business leaders is this idea that these VR technologies are now becoming a part of business enterprises, and also how they're going to be serving customers in the future. And their experience in actually touching it and being a part of it in their learning enterprise prepared them for the world of work they were going into as they started having conversations about these tools. So lots of good purposes with it.
Thank you, Mark. And Nir, in your research, you've looked at a lot of different universities' immersive tech programs. Where do you see this going in the future? And what do you think universities should consider when vetting the technology and some of the different offerings available?
Sorry. Yeah, Kelly and Mark already pointed out a lot of benefits, potential benefits of all these metaverse related technologies like AR and VR and XR and all those. And probably a couple of more things to add to the discussion that was already going on is that many universities, especially small universities, are facing a lot of resource constraint, and they cannot really afford, for example, a lab for medical students, pre-med students, and a lot of human cadver type of thing. And one example was the Fisk University in Nashville, and it really wanted to give that kind of training to students, but they did not have resources. They couldn't afford that. And so basically, if you want to purchase kind of human cadver and maintain that, it is millions of dollars every year to maintain that, and meeting a lot of regulations. And so, okay, just make it short. There are also other options, but they are also very, very expensive. But the simplest way is to get a lot of 3D thing of the human being's body, and so that allows students in a few $100, maybe a few $1,000, to give the same, even better experience than having the real human body. And so that's what many universities are finding. And even Case Western Reserve University, which has a lot of resources and they can afford that, but they decided they will not use the real human thing anymore. They will do the software 3D type of thing rather than doing that. So basically, it is affordable, kind of metaverse is making possible to kind of create all these things, hard to create type of phenomenon in the real world too. And also, other thing is that some universities that have used metaverse found that student performance actually is better in kind of metaverse based learning compared to the pure online like Zoom or even physical thing. Actually, GPA really improved that, and so they might be incorporating more. And so maybe last point I want to talk is that the young generation, if you are talking about 14, 15, 16-year-old kids today, they spend hundreds of millions of hours collectively only in one platform, for example, Roblox, and they spend billions of dollars, maybe their parents' money. And so basically they want to gain some experience. They're experience-driven type of people. And so they are not like people like us, the old generation who really wants to go to class and listen to these professors, and they won't have that experience just in that virtual reality. And so if we look at I think that one of the community colleges of Oregon was using this metaverse related technology just to attract the young generation. So they will not come to this old-fashioned type of university anymore in a few years' time. And so these are some of the things that's where I think a lot of things, but I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So I want to open up a similar question to our other panelists. Mark, you mentioned about, making sure the learning leads the technology use. And so, I'm really curious what factors you think about when you think about what constitutes a good immersive learning experience curriculum. What are you thinking about when you're vetting the technology? What's important in that discussion? Maybe starting with Mark, and then we'll move to Kaylee.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I always think about we call it our to-dos. And the to-dos are, one, with these kinds of technology tools, it's do no harm, do some good, and do keep learning. And the do no harm is really kind of understanding that you make sure you're using it in a way that's, one, keeping privacy first and foremost, but second of all, also thinking, just give a concrete example. In the early days of predictive analytics, people were using predictive analytics in ways that just felt like it was damaging, right? You would take they would say, based on predictive analytics, a diverse student in a STEM pathway who got a C in this course, because the predictive analytics means it's less likely for them to get that degree, I'm going to counsel them into a political science major, or I'm going to counsel them into a sociology major. We think that kind of does violence to that student. They actually wanted to succeed in STEM. What can you do to actually help them improve that pathway, as opposed to, because that's good for the institution, not necessarily good for the student, right? So part of it, that do no harm, you have to have that in there. That applies to this one as well, because you actually are going to get a lot of, I think George Siemens and his group at the Link Lab has shown that you get a lot of affective data out of this in terms of what kind of like really connects things to learning. And you could use that to manipulate people and connect, and all kinds of, like, down the road, you could see ways of this being manipulative. So do no harm is a big thing for, as educators, we have to hold on to. The second is do some good, which is figure out in what places and spaces is this really useful. So for example, in College of Education, you have folks who have to go in and do clinicals as well. And so they have to do sometimes special education, for example. That was a part of a big program where we used a VR simulation for IEPs with special education, where we created a virtual environment where a student can come in and lead an individual education plan, which means a meeting with parents, with the student, and with teachers to set a plan together for that special ed student. Well, somebody who's not incredibly, who's not well versed in it yet and is really getting their reps, they actually could do some damage to, they could cause some problems for the student and for the family. So getting a VR environment where you could actually do the puppeteer version of it and actually have them do some simulations, that's kind of great, because they can get reps and they can try, test, and fail. And it's in an environment where no one's going to get hurt. And what we saw with the students is the students would come back afterwards and they loved it, because they would do it 8, 9, 10 times, and they would wait till it actually worked incredibly well. And then they would love they got a videotape of their version of their IEP, and they loved it because it was like their gold standard version of it. But what was great about it was those reps gave them the ability to actually think on their feet and get good feedback from their faculty members about how to pull it together. That's a perfect use case, right, for how this would play out. And it's very similar to, there's not a pilot on the planet in the US military that doesn't do hundreds of hours of simulations before they ever get behind a big piece of equipment, because it's dangerous, right? Those fail-safe environments, you really want people to be able to have that kind of environment. So figuring out what are the places where learning can really be improved by this. I love the comment around getting folks who from rural Appalachia and letting them tour the Louvre. Right? You know, they might not be able to fly to Paris, but I now can go into a metaverse environment and actually be in a simulated Louvre. That is awesome, right? Those kinds of things where you're opening doors for people, that's a perfect kind of use case. What we have to be careful of is what I call the PowerPoint problem, right? When PowerPoint came on and it was like the new hot thing, and believe it or not, it was the new hot thing for a while. People were always talking about it. It just got overused in everything, to the point where every student focus group I was a part of, students talked about death by PowerPoint. Right, and they would say most people who were using it had no power nor a point. Right, and it was clearly being used because it was a thing. It wasn't being used because it actually improved the learning. That's what I worry about with metaverse, is people are going to invest a bunch of time and money in creating a metaverse campus that has no educational value for the student. It actually is just cool, right, as opposed to something that creates some kind of substantive value. And that's the do keep learning. That's where we should ask hard questions about, is this a good use of our resources, a good use of our time? Does it actually improve and deepen learning? Does it help the students persist at a high level, engage at a higher level? And if we do that together as we're doing this, I think we're going to have some really good outcomes.
Thanks, Mark. Kaylee, on to you.
Yes, I really, I'll kind of jump off of some of Mark's points there. I really like the idea of it can be cool and that's great, but what else is it? And I think that as you're designing curriculum, it's just good curriculum design in general. Anything that you think of when you're designing a curriculum in any other field of study in any other way, using any other technology, can be applied to VR, right? So you start with the end in mind. What do you want the student to get out of this? What are the learning outcomes, and how can you achieve that best using, and it doesn't matter what technology it is, right? With those learning outcomes, is it best utilized through XR, or is it best utilized through an in-person experiment? Is it best utilized in other ways? And then I think in addition to that, and this is just sort of for the XR industry in general, what does XR provide that isn't being provided in any other way currently? So you can mirror and do a total digital twin of a current curriculum that you have in VR, and that's great. But what elements does VR have that you can't replicate in any other way? And how can you add that into the experience? So for instance, if you're talking about anatomy, right, you can create a skeleton in VR that students can come and learn from. But what else does VR provide? What additional layer can you add on to that will really help learning outcomes? So is it that you can actually open up a bone and blow it up and do like a microscopic version of that bone, or is it, looking at this organ and spinning it around and like opening it up and zooming in, zooming out, being able to do those kinds of interactions maybe that you can't do in the real world that you can do in virtual reality. So just making sure that as you're looking for 3D experiences, making sure that it actually adds something. So ask yourself, why is this not an in-person experience? And is it, it can be money, it can be time, it can be whatever. But why is this not in person? Why is this not online? And how does VR really add to the learning experience rather than just kind of being something that's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. And for this question, I'm going to start with Kaylee, but want to open it up to the other panelists to comment on how can we keep working to iterate and improve the technology based on actual student and teacher experience?
Yeah, so I think that that's something that's really important as you're designing curriculum, is involving the customers, right? Like in any other technology industry, you want to build what the customers want to see and how they want to experience it. So if, a Gen X person or a Gen Z person builds something, it'll kind of be based on their experiences and with their biases intact, right? So really talking to customers and talking to learners and figuring out what they want out of their learning experience is really important. And I think you're seeing this trend throughout education, right? Is kind of this individualized education and being very purposeful in how you're creating these experiences and keeping the whole student in mind, and making sure you're designing for the end user, for that customer. And then just speaking of making it accessible to all students, right? I think it's important to consider things like, basic accessibility, as we talked about before, and just designing with that end goal in mind and involving them in the process as much as you can. And then I think that especially the younger generations, when I was in college and in high school, I don't feel like I was really encouraged to think too critically about the curriculum that I was partaking in. But students now, as they're growing up and with the area of TikTok and things like that, if you go onto TikTok, you'll find students, critiquing their educational experiences, which is something that I think is new to me anyway, something I haven't seen before. That's really interesting, is these students have really great ideas and a fresh perspective on how they want to be taught and how they think is best to learn, which we can learn from, right? As you kind of combine the two areas of expertise, the people who have all the research and all the institutional knowledge and all the background, as well as these new fresh ideas. How can we combine that and create something that's really engaging and really interesting using both perspectives to create something?
Yeah, and just opening that same question to our other panelists, and also thinking through and curious from your experience, are students and teachers really buying into this process? What is their interest and involvement? We'll start with Mark. He's unmuted, I see, and then we'll move to Nir if he wants to comment.
I want to hear from Nir first. I haven't heard from him in a little bit. I love it. Jump in, Nir.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I think, Mark and Kelly already covered great points. The most important thing is to work with your customers, and they are the students in this case, and what value exactly you are delivering to them. And so that is the most important thing. And actually, really, we do not know at this point. The technologies are still evolving, and where they will be exactly in the future, and still they are trying to figure out all these things. And regarding your question of whether kind of teachers and students are really buying that, and we don't know the answer to probably, and only a few teachers are participating currently, and the program is really kind of, the virtual reality type of thing is really low right now. I mean, any type of metaverse application is used by only very small percentage of students and teachers, maybe, I don't know, 0.00001% or something, but it's still developing. Probably I'll focus a little bit on the privacy and security part, and which is really important. Mark also pointed out a little bit earlier, and just I'll elaborate that. And when we talk about that, and this may not be the very important thing right now, but could be important for many people actually. So when you talk about the privacy thing, actually many of the programs that I reviewed using the metaverse, they are being provided, or they are being supported by these big technology companies, and the business models of all these companies revolve around data. Their goal is to collect as much data from the students and teachers as possible. So that is one thing. And so the data in the metaverse is very rich data we are talking about, and data like the location of students, and the physical features, and the heart rate, and pupil size, and all those things they can collect. And so a lot of implications of this one. And number one is probably when the students and professors and teachers know that this type of data is being collected by all these technology companies, and that goes to them, and they may not freely participate. And that is one thing. If someone is collecting my heart rate, and so maybe my location information, my physical feature, my voice, and I may not participate a lot actually, and that might be one thing. And so basically in the cybersecurity standpoint, in the past we were talking about monetary harm. They will steal my money, or whatever money I have in my bank. So it is more serious right now. It is physical harm actually. They can cause physical harm with all this AR and all those types of technology. And so again, going back to one example of Roblox, for example, and it is also moving big into the educational thing, and providing educational content to the college and school K-12 students. And so there are a lot of user-generated contents, and we don't really know those contents are really safe. And so basically predators might be kind of infiltrating into all those things. So these are some of the concerns that we have to address probably. I'll just stop here for now. Thank you.
No, I love that, Nir. And the things I would add into that conversation, Jamie, is one, the Rogerian innovation diffusion theory holds, right? So just Google the curve, right? And we're clearly in an innovators, early adopters phase right now, with a lot of folks kind of embracing this. The early majority, as it starts, going up that curve, and you get more and more people involved, that involves getting more and more evidence that it works, right? You need to see more and more. The innovators and early adopters have to do the work to get more data that says, hey, this is working, more people want it, it's going to draw more students, that they're going to learn more effectively. And that evidence gets you into that early majority. We're going to get more and more people buying that. And this is very common, right? And it moves faster and faster based on the technology that's coming in, but the rules really hold. And to get past that early majority, you have to get use cases, you have to get models. And so you get into the late majority when you actually have some playbooks, right? And when we have playbooks for example, disciplinary playbooks for, hey, here's how you use it in education, here's how you use it in healthcare, here's how you use it in defense industries, whatever it's going to be. Like those playbooks make that late majority, they jump right in because they have something they can adopt. And then you're going to have some people who are like, no matter what you do, you're not going to make them happy. They're going to be angry about it. Or there might be really good critics about like what the challenges are within that. We're going to have all of that in this stage right now. We're clearly, I think, in the early adopter innovator phase, and we're getting evidence around ways it can be used. I would argue within that, we have to be careful of the kind of the let them eat cakeism of people who are angry about this coming in. Oh, they should just go to Paris and experience a Louvre. Well, somebody from rural Appalachia is not going to be able to hop on a plane probably and afford going to Paris, right? This gives them a different way of experiencing it. And maybe when they get their degree and they get a good job, they can eventually go, but this lets them do it now, right? And so there are things we can do that creates access to learning that is really powerful. But we have the problem of the digital divide issue still, right? Where we have internet deserts and people who don't have the same access. We at National are leaning into this idea of adult learning centers, where even though people are learning online, they can come and have a safe place to learn, high-speed internet, and they can have XR technologies at their fingertips so they can actually do this kind of learning in a space that's safe and connected, and even with childcare, with partnerships with the Y. I think we're going to have to get innovative to make sure we can get the accessibility and access kinds of issues there and overcome the digital divide. I do think a couple of big admonitions. One, remember, if you're going to do this work and try to get the evidence, you have to instrument this to be able to get the data, which means as you're rolling this out, you have to work with your vendors, you have to work with your own internal people to make sure you're actually getting the data flow to be able to ask the questions about, is it working or is it not? Because otherwise it turns into whoever tells the best story wins. Right. And what you want is data that tells you whether or not, and I'm going to argue hard that your big data point should be, is it improving or expanding learning? If it's improving or expanding learning, and then how do you know? What's the evidence that's telling you it's improving or expanding learning? What I worry about is sometimes the dependent variable becomes, am I just growing? Right. That's great. Fine. If you're going to attract more students, that might be one of your things, but like, is it actually improving learning, and is it expanding the learning kind of opportunities for the students? That becomes a really big deal. I will tell you in this is that the one big fear for me on this one is this creates a flood of data. I mean, a flood of data. And these data are going to be a commodity. There are going to be actors who want to commoditize this data, sell this data, and they want to market against this data. And they're going to want you to use these tools so they can take those data, sell and market them in other places. And so we, in the world of education, we have experience with some of this recently in the last decade or so. We've got to be very careful about two things. One, people taking our data and commoditizing it in other places, and without our understanding of what's being done with it and how it's being used. And two is understanding that they actually could put your data in what's called data jail. And the data jail initiative is they charge you back, they charge you for your own data. Right, it's data about your own students, and they charge you. They don't only charge you for the tool; they charge you for your data as another kind of product, which I hate. Right, it's the idea it's your data and your students helped created that. You should be able to have access to your data because you want to ask the question of, are the students learning? You shouldn't be held hostage, right, because they have your data somewhere and they're going to charge you back for it at the same kind of way. So it's just kind of some of my feelings around this. It's going to be a journey very similar to some of the other things we've gone through, but boy, it's super exciting to see how this could open doorways to learning in all kinds of exciting ways.
Thank you, everyone. And I forgot to note at the top, but I will be monitoring the chat. So if any of our participants have questions, I'd love to ask your questions as well. I'm going to come back to some of those points that you all brought up about the data flows, but for now, I just want to focus a little bit more on the equity piece. Mark, you recently published an article and you wrote, while VR can no longer be dismissed as a mere fad or state-of-the-art toy for the wealthy, it still has a long way to go before it can serve as a true tool for educational equity. So can you talk about some of your equity concerns and what you're thinking about it, and really what you meant by that?
Yeah, I just mentioned a few of them, right? It's the issue of the digital divide, and it's the issue of, my own kids. I think about this with my own kids. I came from a family of 9 kids, 3 adopted, 25 foster kids who rotated through my house growing up. We did not have a lot of money. If it wasn't for access institutions, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. I had to bus tables and wait tables to pay my way through school. The only reason we had the technology, we had some interesting new technology while I was growing up, is because my dad worked at Panasonic. And so we brought home stuff from work, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have had any of that technology at our fingertips. I compare that with my own kids now, and I've got 4 kids, which my mom calls a starter family compared to that I grew up in. My kids have had the newest and kind of cutting edge technology from birth, right? They've always had it at their fingertips. And my kids range from 14 to 24, which is funny because my oldest kids actually began with VHS, moved to DVRs, then moved to DVDs, and then moved to streaming. My youngest has never, every physical form factor, he doesn't recognize it because they've all seen the different changes of it. But I only bring that up because their comfort with this technology is at a whole different level, because they have experienced it day to day. So where they're digitally native, there are students who come from communities that don't have that kind of access, for whom they'll push and pull to get it, and smartphones give them some of it, and they'll do whatever they can do to get the smartphones to pull it in. But that lack of access is a whole different experience. If you live in a community that has gigabit streaming internet, right, and you have at your fingertips use of tools and technology all day long using those tools. It is a fundamentally different lived experience than if you're in a community where you're still using dial-up, or if you're in a rural community that has to use horrible satellite internet that has like barely any connection. And people say, well, it doesn't really, it exists. It is, look at the data right around the country. We still have internet deserts in this. So I think we're just gonna have to, that doesn't mean we don't do VR or XR. What that means is we think about what are ways we can help students who come from communities, or people who come from communities who don't have that kind of access and don't have that kind of native understanding of it. How do we help them get that kind of experience? Which is why I like the adult learning center idea, why I like educational institutions making sure they infuse this into learning so students can actually touch and feel and be a part of this before they get into their world of work. I think it evens the playing field, right, in terms of how that plays out. So for me, it's the understanding that we're trying to open those pathways to possibility for more and more diverse students than ever before. And our problem in the world of education is we have a fundamentally distinct system for those who are wealthy versus those who are not. I mean, just be blunt about it. We just do. And trying to make sure we're innovating and committing our tools and resources to helping broader populations get access. And what I love about new technologies is it has always opened the door for more and more diverse students to learn more effectively. Full stop. Every new technology, if we put it on purpose, can open the door for more and more diverse students to be more successful. And I'm just hoping XR is a continuation of that trend.
Thank you, Mark. So Nir and Kaylee, starting with you, Nir, what are your equity concerns and what do you think about it in that space? And with a focus on, how do we make this a more inclusive space? And I'll ask the same question to Kaylee after.
Great, yeah, thank you very much. I think one thing that Metaverse can potentially address is that I have some data here. And actually, apparently, there is a big disparity if you look at the educational label in the rural area versus urban areas in the US. And so, actually, 2015, I have a little old data, and it says that only 18% of men and 20% of women living in the rural area of the US had kind of bachelor's degree. And if you take that to the urban area, like 32% is men and 33% is almost double in the urban area compared to rural area. So what exactly are the problems these rural people are facing? Maybe like one example, I was looking at the South Dakota State University, and they are one of the universities using the metaverse-based education. And so their focus is, I don't know, I have never been to South Dakota, but I imagine many people have to drive for 4 hours to go to college to take classes, and it may not be that easy. So basically, the rural-urban divide, rather than people driving for 4 hours to take classes, and they might just take classes from home, and so that potentially can metaverse. And already we pointed out earlier, the other speakers, is that, it is kind of almost bridges the gap between real and the virtual thing, almost like the real one, not quite real, but that might be one thing, rural-urban gap that currently they have about the equity in education. And for that to happen, probably, and metaverse might require some type of good infrastructure, broadband and all the things, but I'm sure broadband is kind of developing very rapidly, and in a few years' time, and the rural area people will have the same broadband as people living in Washington, D.C. and other places. So that is one thing. Rural-urban divide is what metaverse can potentially bridge, I think, when you talk about equity.
Yeah. I will say I couldn't agree with you more on that, especially the idea of the virtual classroom, where you literally have a combination of live and possibly even at some point holographic students alongside you, right, in these environments. That's a real thing that will be happening at some point. Exactly. But I wrote 2 books on the digital divide back in late 1990s, early 2000s. And I would be a part of testimonies before state houses or in big panels like this. And I've heard multiple people say, well, within 5 to 10 years, digital divide's going to be gone anyway. Everyone's going to have the same kind of access. That's 20 years ago, right? And we're not even close, right? And what I love about the last infrastructure bill that just came through Congress is at least we're addressing some of the last mile stuff, but we still have not done the full rural electrification project or the Tennessee Valley Authority stuff to actually get that infrastructure to everybody, which is still is an equity issue for a lot of communities. Like our country is still the let them eat cakeism of internet has been a real problem, in terms of our access to educational opportunity. So that's a real thing. So I think combining the focus on trying to help more folks be able to access this for good educational purposes really matters. And so does the conversation around making sure folks are not manipulated, controlled, and their privacy violated because of these tools and technologies, right? We need to make sure that we're securing the data. At National, we're a center for academic excellence for cybersecurity. We've got bachelor's, master's, doctorates in cybersecurity. And what's interesting is our students are now really getting into this idea of how do we create cybersecure environments in more of these hybrid places. What we see now is increasingly, to be a leader in the business world, military world, healthcare world, whatever it is, you better understand hybridization, meaning you're going to do some stuff live and you're going to do a whole lot of stuff online and a whole lot of stuff now in VR, XR kinds of technologies. And you have to understand how you blend those together. I mean, even just holding a meeting these days, you have 5 people live in the room and you've got 10 people up on Zoom, right? And all that's going to be blending. And I would argue we're going to have to just train people to get better and better at operating in these mixed environments. It's going to be a part of that skill set over time. And it's really good for our students to experience that in their learning enterprise. So then they're ready to take that into their world of work and world of learning.
Thank you, Mark. And Kaylee, do you want to comment on some of the accessibility pieces around immersive tech?
Yeah, I was going to say, I love what Mark and Nir's points on sort of social equities, socioeconomic equity, things like that. I think there is also another kind of side to this, which is accessibility wise. Things like students who may not have use of one of their hands, for instance, how do they participate in some of these experiences? Making sure that, students with disabilities, either physical or mental disabilities, or neurodivergence. I think that there's a lot of good things. There's a lot of good research around neurodivergence that I could go into detail with. I won't today, but I think on the flip side, you talk about people who have disabilities on being able to move around in a space safely, things like that, mobility issues, all of those sorts of things that you just really need to make sure that you're keeping in mind, the XR developers really need to be keeping in mind. The other big thing that I think is one of the biggest challenges that XR is, I'm hoping, tackling now with the developers so that it's tackled for everybody, but things like hearing impairments. There's still not a lot of ways that people with hearing impairments can participate in XR experiences because there's no closed captions in a lot of these experiences. And it's really complicated because if you think about in a VR headset, you're moving around, those captions would have to follow that person around their environment. And that's not quite figured out on kind of a global level yet for all headset users. So those are the sorts of things that I think still need to be discovered in XR and solved for in XR in terms of accessibility to make sure that access can be granted to all students who would like to use this technology.
Thank you. And Kaylee, I want to stick with you for this next question and also draw in one of the questions from the chat. We've seen that there's a potential for a significant amount of data collection in using this technology. And can you talk a little bit about what makes it unique for this type of technology and what data collection looks like?
Yeah, so, and I think Mark and Nir both touched on this as well, and we'd love to hear their thoughts. But I think that it's really interesting to think about there's a lot of affordances of XR. Things like eye tracking is really interesting and opens up really interesting use cases, again, for accessibility, for other reasons, for learning outcomes, you can learn a lot, but that also opens up a whole world of data that companies can then use and abuse, as Mark had mentioned. So you think about eye tracking, things like that. And there's actually some research out there that you can tell who a person is. You can identify a person within, I think it's, 10 to 15 minutes of them putting on a headset based on how their head moves, what their eyes are doing, even just before eye tracking, even just how they're moving around a space. These headsets can identify who you are and what you're doing with it. So yeah, just being really careful and knowing exactly what data they're gathering and just being a very informed user. Those terms and conditions, we all generally tend to skip them and just go ahead and accept. But with an emerging technology that doesn't have a lot of regulation around it currently at a government level, making sure that you're reading through those terms and conditions and know what you're agreeing to and what data they're gathering so that you are an informed user, I think is really important in any emerging technology space.
Yeah, I'm going to read the question from the chat and pose it to first Nir and then Mark. How does an institution secure the data that they collected during VR to protect student privacy? How can these amounts and types of data be truly secured?
Great. Yeah. Kelly and Mark already pointed out, I think this is really new area that they don't have really government regulations. And so the only way to protect data is to make sure that when they sign contract with all these technology providers. And so actually someone reviewed all these contract that these metaversities had with technology providers. Actually, not many of them had any explicit terms and conditions about what the technology providers are going to do with the data. So maybe the one of the best ways would be for the universities to or the schools to make in the explicit thing in the contract to make sure that data, sensitive data, like okay, so Kelly already pointed out there is kind of looking at your eye movement, and even they know how your brain is working, and they can sell the data to advertisers, and advertisers can really target you, and that would be very effective for them to sell the product to the company. Maybe big technology companies might sell that data to advertisers. So basically, and keeping it short, universities or schools have to make sure that they do not transfer this data or kind of to all these technology providers. That is probably the best way to do that, I think, at this point, due to the lack of regulations.
I'm going to be as blunt and honest as I can be on this one. Higher education is really challenged in this area. And part of the reason is because our data systems have been optimized for accountability, not for analysis. And what I mean by that is, we have regulatory regimes that come from the Department of Education, from our states, from our associations, whatever it might be, from our accreditors. And our IR capabilities, institutional research capabilities, have been hyper-focused on responding to those things. And so because of that, it's actually caused a problem, because the variables we end up using as independent variables to see if students are going to succeed or learn end up being the variables that are tracked for accountability. So we end up, that's why race is always a predictor of success. That's why the things that are part of the accountability metrics end up becoming the things that we measure. And because we already have them as independent variables, we correlate them against the outcomes, and we assume that's the driver. What we need is more data systems that are focused on care and learning. Like, what is really happening to help students stay, what's helping them help to learn more effectively. But our data systems aren't optimized for that. And so I would argue in the last 10 years, we've suddenly had a bunch of institutions and a bunch of efforts to try to change that game and try to say, hey, we definitely need to do accountability. I know why we have to do that. It's part of where our funding comes from, and we're being responsive to the folks who are governing us. But you need data to be able to manage care and manage learning. And that means we're probably going to need partners in that process, because there's only a few university sets that can probably do this on their own. We're going to probably have to work with cloud partner providers, I don't care if it's Azure or AWS, places that actually have secure cloud environments where we can pull these data and actually keep them secure and use them for the kind of resources we need to pull together. A lot of institutions around the country just struggle to do basic enterprise data warehousing stuff. And all that is focused on accountability, not focused on the learning side. So the hard truth is we're not good at it right now, and we have to be very careful. That's where the privacy stuff comes in, because the hacking on stuff like this will be a lot easier, because we're probably less concerned about these data than we are about the compliance data, because that's where all our concern is right now. It's on the accountability side. So I think we're going to have to work with some partners, and probably partners who are already doing the security stuff for us and with us as we're kind of pulling that together. And what I'm hoping, though, is we get laser focused on how we use this kind of data to really improve the care and connection of our students to their learning journeys, to help them more effectively finish, and then really think about what kind of support they need and what kind of resources they need, and then optimizing the learning journey, how we help them learn. So the whole, Society for Learning Analytics Research, that has to be plugged into this, where we can kind of understand how it drives the outcomes of it. Our challenge right now is, like everybody in the world of higher education, I got to tell you, if I surveyed institutional research leaders across the 4,000 higher education institutions out there, they're probably spending 80–90% of their time on compliance, right? On trying to manage iPads and those kinds of things. And it's a hard conversation to have, but that reality therapy makes us even more concerned around the privacy side, to make sure that we're really buttoning ourselves up on this, because we basically have a small creek, a river right now. We're about to get an ocean, right? And when that ocean comes in, we got to figure out what we're going to do with it.
Yeah, earlier in the conversation, you talked about predictive analytics, and I'm just curious, like with this data collection and just the volume of it, what do you think about with predictive analytics, and how is that at top of mind?
No, I think we are going to have folks who are able to use advanced predictive analytics, machine learning, and AI to be able to create understandings of how this data is actually correlated, especially to support and to learning. So, for example, understanding when a student needs the right kind of support as early as possible. If I'm in a small environment with a highly, like, if I have only 1,200 people at my school and I've got a 1-to-10 faculty student ratio and everybody lives on campus, that's a data rich environment. It might not be digitized, but it's a data rich environment. I know a lot about those students and I can just tell by body language if something's wrong, right? I can immediately kind of jump in. In these mega environments with more information flooding in, I think a lot of these machine learning and AI tools and predictive analytics tools can probably take a bunch of these data points and actually pinpoint when a student's in distress. And that's another ethical issue for us, is if I can build an algorithm that can tell you with pretty good accuracy, hey, there's a 95% chance this person is suicidal, right? Or this person is going to drop out within the next 2 weeks. And we're there. We're at the point where we actually have some data models that can show you those kinds of things. Like there is a duty of care, right? Where like somebody should be reaching out and at least checking in to see what's going on with these kind of folks. And I think that's going to raise all kinds of other concerns for us to figure out how we kind of drive this, because the number one reason people don't succeed in higher education is not because they wash out academically. That's the biggest myth that's been blown up in the last decade. The number one reason people leave higher education is because life happens, because of psychosocial issues, or because of basic needs, right? Housing insecurity, food insecurity, transportation. And those things you can pick up those triggers, right? You can see those things in the data, and then we could be doing things to support students in real time. So I think there's real power of wedding some of these greater data flows together with really good data systems to be able to ask the right kinds of questions. We believe at National in the notion of whole human education, which is understanding our students are anders. Because almost all of our students, we call them anders because they are parents and students, they are deployed and students, they are working and students. And that andism like makes their journey more complex. And we have to really pay attention and make sure we're wrapping the right support around that student at the right time in the right way. And for some students, they might be a rock star and they want us out of their way. For other students, they need a lot of scaffolding, right, to give them the right academic and financial and support. But then once they get strong enough, that scaffold goes away and they kind of rock on, right, in terms of how that plays out. We want the data system to help us, give us some guides about where we focus our scarce resources to provide the best support for our students.
Thank you. Time is winding very quickly, and so I want to pull in this last question from the chat for any of our speakers. What would you recommend for someone who's just about to start his or her PhD work in XR? What key areas would you recommend that the candidate focus on? So I think this is sort of thinking about the future of this subject matter. So I'd open it to any of our panelists.
So I'm a big fan of the Society for Learning Analytics Research, and I would say one of the biggest things is to really look at how these tools can actually improve and expand learning, right? So you can combine some of that work on learning analytics with this and understand. And I think, Kaylee, you might want to speak to this. It's also figuring out which environments are prime for this, like which curricular environments actually are like, it is well suited to be able to kind of roll this in and then figure out like where you start. Because I think people are going to have to figure out a crawl, walk, run strategy, and knowing where to start is going to be pretty important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. And then I think that there's also a lot of interesting work that still needs to be done around safety. So what does this do, for safety, both psychological safety as well as physical safety? And, how does this affect eyes and minds and brains, those sorts of things. And then also something that sort of we've been looking at on my team is sort of the convergence of a lot of different technologies. So how does XR converge with AI? And I know, Mark, you talked a little bit about this as well. But how does XR converge with robotics? I don't know. There may be a lot of convergence stories that would be really interesting to study and see how that might impact the experience that users might have or learners might have.
Great, yeah. I can add a few points. Time is already almost over. So yeah, depending on which discipline your PhD degree is focusing on, maybe if you are in a business school, right, like me, I'm working on. So basically, you can work how companies are kind of changing their business models based on all these kind of XR technologies and how they are changing the strategy and all that type of thing. And also, pretty much for all areas, looking at the societal thing that Mark pointed out, maybe like some type of bias. There is already in the curriculum, teaching and learning, there is bias, and they said that if you use television and movie, the bias is even higher, whatever students learn. And because the XR and AR and VR type of technology engages all senses, and bias might be probably the highest, given higher than all that. Maybe they can study bias. Or if you are working on some type of government thing, we recently worked on a paper on how governments all over the world are using kind of all these metaverse related technology. There are more and more governments are using, and there are kind of tons of research opportunities in this area, definitely, to work on stuff here.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I really appreciate your time and expertise here, and would really open anyone in our audience here to continue the conversation on LinkedIn or with us here at FPF. Please do feel free to reach out. I'll toss it back to Daniel if he wants to do a quick conclusion as well.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to speak and provide your thoughts about the nexus between education and immersive technologies. I learned a lot, and we will be circulating notes from this meeting to our stakeholders. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Bye.